Hi everybody. In today's video, I want to talk about how you can learn multiple languages at the same time. A lot of people think it's impossible. A lot of people usually suggest that you learn one language to a pretty high level, then switch to another language. I would say that I personally thought that myself as well back in the day. I used to think that it was very, very hard to, basically impossible to learn multiple languages because they're always going to be mixed up in your head. You know, you're going to mix up words here and there. And I feel like there is some truth to this because I've studied quite a lot of languages in my life. I still am studying quite a lot of languages right now. And today I want to talk about kind of like my experience with learning multiple languages. These are mostly just my opinions. There's not going to be any scientific proof to back up any of this, but it's sort of what I've experienced. So you can of course take it with a grain of salt. So let's get right into it. First of all, I want to say that I feel like one thing I definitely noticed when I was growing up, I was speaking Norwegian. Norwegian was my native language. It still is my native language. I didn't really speak much English until about the age of 17 or 18. So up until that point in my life, English was kind of like, it was a language that I understood. I could communicate in English. I could write in English. If I listened to English, I would understand like everything, or 90%, 95%. The first time I remember being good at English when my classmates were not was, I think it was about 4th grade in elementary school. We used to go to some activity school after the regular school, and I remember that they used to have a PlayStation 2 and we would just play that. There was one time when we were playing a Spider-Man game, the person that was playing was failing all the time to do what he was supposed to do, and they couldn't read English, so on the loading screen it would say avoid this and this and this, etc, etc. And when the loading screen came, I said, it says right there what you have to do, just avoid this and go there. And I remember everyone looked at me and they were like, you can read that shit? I think we were like 10 years old, but I don't know, I didn't really think too much about it back then. I just thought, yeah, I mean, it's English. I use English every day. I play games in English. I read books in English. I watch TV shows in English. What's the big deal? But the thing is, English to me was never something I spoke with my family. It was never something I spoke with my friends. So it was kind of just like this thing I had in my head that I'd never really thought of as another language. It was just Norwegian and English. And then when I was about 13, when we started middle school in Norway, you have to pick a secondary language that is not Norwegian or English. And in my school, we had the choice between French, Spanish, and German. So back in the day, you know, when you're an edgy teenager, you think German is funny because of Nazi Germany and all that stuff. So me and my friends, we'd pick German. Back then, I had no interest in learning other languages. Like English to me was not really another language. English to me was just something I acquired in order to enjoy my video games, right? But yes, I was kind of like forced to learn German, and I didn't really enjoy it that much. Like we were in class, we were kind of like joking around, messing around. It wasn't really serious. I just learned like very basic stuff, learned some grammar, but it was kind of forced into you. You know, when you study something at school, you're only studying it to pass the class, right? You're studying it to get good grades, and that's pretty much it. So I did that for 3 years, basically learned nothing. After that, I decided to start learning Japanese. I was about 15 at the time. I had decided to learn Japanese because my best friend was doing martial arts. He was doing karate, and they were using Japanese there. I don't know why, but he or his family decided that he should take Japanese courses. And then because he'd started doing that, he was saying to me, yo, Patrick, you should do Japanese as well. You should learn Japanese as well. You know, I wasn't really interested in languages. I thought like, what's the point of that? Like, when am I ever going to use that? What's the big deal? I didn't join his courses, but I started just downloading apps, how to read hiragana, how to read katakana, things like that. I downloaded some Japanese grammar apps. I was reading those as well, got some books. But it was about half a year later that we started high school. And in high school in Oslo, where I'm from, you can actually choose to not have German, French, or Spanish. You can cut away those classes. You can pick another language that you want. I think the languages we could pick at the time were Japanese, Korean, Chinese, Italian, and Russian. those were all at different schools around Oslo. So basically, when you would usually have language classes at school, you would have like a recess in those periods, and then 2 days a week you'd have to go to evening classes, travel to that other school by yourself, and have that other language class there. So we did that. My best friend and I, we went to another school in Oslo just to have Japanese classes. So we did that for 2 years. But I noticed early on when I was studying that, because I was actually legitimately interested now, I noticed that in the beginning, when you try to learn new words and stuff, you kind of mix up some of the words in your head with other words from other languages. In my case, it was German that I was trying to learn before. I noticed that I was mixing up some Japanese words with some German words. I thought it was interesting because they're not very similar languages at all, so why would my brain mix them up? But the conclusion that I've come to is that in my head back then, basically, Norwegian and English were languages I could speak or utilize very, very well at a very high level, so they already had very clear roots in my head, you know? I wouldn't mix those up. But German and now Japanese, in my head, were kind of, you know, they weren't like fully rooted in anything. I didn't have a lot of experience using the languages, so in my head, they were kind of seen as just the foreign languages, or like the foreign language. I think the way that my brain categorized them was that they were just put into this box of foreign language. And as I'm building stronger roots, consuming more media with those languages to immerse myself and to really build them up independently, before that happens, they tend to attach together as the foreign language in your head. So what I did to counteract this later on when I started learning more languages and more languages is quite a few things really. So the first thing I do is when I learn a new language, I think about where is this language spoken? Who are the people speaking this language? How do they look like? What's their culture? What's their history? And I try to think of that language. I try to connect that. And the other thing that really helped me a lot is to learn the IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet. I have some videos on my channel talking about how you can pronounce the letters, how you can read them, etc. You can check them out if you want to. Basically, the IPA is like an alphabet of sounds because every language that a human can speak has sounds that we can assign letters to. The reason why a lot of people struggle with pronunciation in a lot of foreign languages is because of something called allophones. So when you are a child and you pick up a new language, when you acquire a new language as a child, it could be your first language or multiple languages when you're very, very young. At that time, your brain is processing the raw data of all those language sounds. So it's a very heavy task for the brain to do when you're very young. And as you grow as a child, your brain realizes that you don't really need to distinguish between sha, sha, sha. They're all kind of the same sound. This is all going to be different for every single language, but basically all the sounds that we can clearly separate into separate letters, all those sounds that you could process as a child are slowly phased out and they're kind of merged together. So for example, if an English speaker says a shade, or a shade, they're kind of the same sound. You don't really think of them as separate sounds. You might think of them as different thickness of the sound, but it's still an SH sound. So learning IPA made me realize that there are a lot of different sounds that we can pronounce, and learning to pronounce the IPA made me realize that a lot of languages that sound similar and have different words very often have marginal differences between the pronunciations. So learning the IPA will allow you to distinguish between those languages more easily because you're not thinking of this SH sound as just an SH sound. This is actually the alveolar palatal fricative, while this one here is just a retroflex fricative, things like that. That really helps separate languages in my brain. And also when it comes to spelling languages, a lot of people tend to mix up similar languages when they have similar words. Kind of the same thing here. It's important to know why words are spelled the way they are, what historical changes to the language made it so things became spelled like this. Studying that a tiny bit as well will also help you. So by doing this, we're trying to make it so that you're not just putting everything into this foreign language box in your brain. It's important to put everything into the Japanese box, put everything into the Chinese box, put everything into the Korean box, and of course, there are going to be overlapping words, there are going to be overlapping pronunciations. But I think that if you can separate those languages clearly into their own boxes, like I said, by studying the pronunciation, learning the IPA, learning about the people, learning about their culture and the history of those speaking the language and the language, that helps you to solidify that as a separate box in your brain. And then similarities between that language and that language will not really matter that much, because in your brain you'll just think, yeah, for example, Japanese and Korean do have a lot of overlapping words that mean the same and are pronounced almost the same, even though they have no common ancestor language. But it's because they got a lot of influence from Chinese, or Spanish, Italian, French, Portuguese, Romanian, etc. They're very, very similar languages. They all come from the one Latin ancestor. They all had their own bastardization in different ways. If you look at their history, you'll see why things are spelled the way they are. But I think the more you study the history and the background of these languages, as well as the pronunciation and IPA, it will help you really separate these languages in your head. One reason why I think pronunciation is so important is because all languages by default are spoken languages. The written language is an extension of the spoken language. The spoken language is never an extension of the written language. So processing the sounds of a language, making sure that you get the pitch right, making sure that you get the accent right, is very important. But of course, this is a task that takes quite a long time, and if this all sounds very hard for you, the first thing I would recommend if you're learning a new language is pick a language that is not too similar to one you already know, or another language that you're also studying. If you're building this mindset, if you're building these skills up right now, I wouldn't recommend learning Spanish and Italian at the same time. You can of course try to apply the principles I've talked about here. It's important to know that it is okay to fail, and you've never really failed learning a language. You've learned a lot, it goes into your brain, it's still there. You never forget a language really, it's still there in the back of your mind, but it becomes more passive instead of active. And if you struggle to find motivation to keep learning, you can take a break, you can come back weeks later, months later, even years later. You can restart from where you were. Might take a bit of time to come back into it, but you'll be surprised how fast you can just get back into it and keep building on more building blocks, make it even stronger. The human brain is just crazy. Yeah, that was a bit of a rambling video, I think. Let me know your thoughts about this. Have you tried learning multiple languages at the same time? Has it worked? Has it been a problem? Let me know in the comment section. Don't forget to join our Discord server. There's a lot of cool people there. I'm currently working on a Japanese course on my Patreon. Feel free to check that out as well if you're interested in learning Japanese. As of now, all of the lessons on my Patreon are also available here on YouTube, so you can check that out as well, of course. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode or video. Have a nice day.